Hello friends, welcome in. My name is Andrea and we are here to do some dice pouring today, which I am so excited about. It has been a little while since I have done this. If the audio sounds a little weird, let me know so I can change that so it's easier to hear. But welcome. So my name is Andrea. I am here on Twitch and Twitter at Shadowed Lady Sif, and I'm also over on Instagram with my dice making account Sunflower Dice. And we're going to be pouring some beautiful dice today. We have a couple of objectives for some pours. First, oh dear. First, we're going to drop things because it's just how it goes. So first, I'm going to be recreating the dice for this gorgeous set. It's got some clouds, some purple, kind of wisps in it. Kind of going for some like ethereal vibes here. Lots of shimmer, and then obviously the inking really brings this set together. But we're going to be doing this, and then we're going to be creating a storm cloud variant. So instead of these purples, I'm going to be doing some gray and black ink, which I'm very excited about. Should be a lot of fun. And then I will also be doing, if you have seen on Instagram or Twitter, the Titania dice. We're going to be not recreating them, but we're going to try something similar with some black and neutral dice, kind of some witchy vibes that I'm also really excited about, and hopefully it works out. So yeah, that's the plan for today. I'm very excited about it. If you are into resin making or just dice or things like that in general, I definitely recommend giving the channel a follow. I try and do these resin pouring streams at least once a month. On top of my scheduled streams where I am doing a Sims 4 playthrough. And also, words have just escaped me. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing on Tuesdays yet. I'm going to spend some time this weekend to figure out what's next. I was doing Tunic, but have decided once again that Dark Souls style combat games are not for me. Even though Tunic was super cute and I loved the little fox guy, I spent 30 minutes doing the same thing last time and got really frustrated. So if I pick that up again, it'll probably be off stream. But that means I'm not really sure what I'm doing on Tuesdays yet. So definitely stay tuned for an announcement on that. That being said, we are going to get started. Working with resin, it's really important that you follow safety so that your health is not endangered to make dice, because that's not worth it. So respirators, well-ventilated areas, not letting your pets in the room is really important. So if you hear a cat yowling, it's because she wants inside this office and she's not allowed. Also wearing some gloves because resin can cause skin reactions and we don't want that. Which is why it is really important to not let that toxic stuff get on your skin. So we're doing that. I have IPA handy in case we have a spill. Hopefully we don't. I don't usually need that, but it's always good to have on hand just in case. Yeah, so we're going to get started. I'm going to do the purple cloud dice first. So to do that, I like to set out all my molds ahead of time. So for this pour, we're doing 2 full sets and then some D20s because this mold, you can kind of see here, the D20 has a little bit of a tear in it. So I have some other molds that will hopefully produce a slightly better D20 that I can swap into this set. And then if I can clean this D20 up, I will use it as, some sort of filler die or sell it as a single at a discount. So I have some single D20 molds as well. These molds are made out of silicone. This is what we're going to pour the resin into. They were crafted with my master, so you can see down in the D6 here, it's got my logo on it. This is the 7-piece molds. These are singles. These are all D20 singles. And these are what we call cap molds. These are cap molds instead of sprue molds because sprue molds are great if you want to reduce bubbles if you don't have a pressure pot, but it requires a lot more cleanup because you have to cut the sprue off, and then depending on where the sprue is, you just have a lot of cleanup. So these cat molds are not great if you're not using a pressure pot unless you're super, super, super careful. You can still get voids with them if you don't use them properly, but they generally have less cleanup because you're just kind of cleaning up the edge that the cap sits on. So you can see here, this is what the top of the mold looks like, and I put my ones on top because I would rather the one face look a little rough than the 20 look a little rough. So that's our setup. I have all the stuff out for all the pours we're going to be doing today. These are going to be very similar, pretty low ingredient, which is really inclusion, I guess, which is nice. So we're just using alcohol inks, some glitters because I don't make dice that don't have glitter in them. And then for the floral set, we'll get into the florals and such there. I also use like paper mixing cups for separating out the resin to add color. And then right now I have some of these. I don't really love these. They're a little too big, but my silicone measuring cups need replaced and I haven't done that yet. So that's where we're at. That's how we are set up today. I also have some toothpicks and some little pipettes that we'll get into later as well. But for now we have to start with the boring part, which is mixing the resin. So I've got a measuring cup here. I'm gonna go grab the resin. Right now I am testing out the Chromatic Castles Chromatic Cast. This is a new resin that just came out. It is a 1-to-1 epoxy resin, meaning you're going to measure out equal parts, part A and part B. 1-to-1 is my favorite to use because it requires the least amount of math, and I am less likely to get that math wrong. Because sometimes it's like 2-to-1. The Terraform that I might use later if we have time, which is like a faux stone material, is a 1 to 2.5. The math just gets really hard. So with something like that, I always end up with more than I need just because I want easy math. But the 1-to-1 is really nice. So we're measuring out, for this, I usually do 40 of part A and 40 of part B. That's going to give me enough to fill all of these molds. And then I have dump molds that I put all the extra in so that we're not wasting anything. Because this isn't the most environmentally friendly thing, so I make sure to use all of the resin as much as possible. I make little meeples. I've got jewelry molds. I have a tic-tac-toe mold. So we do a lot of stuff with the excess resin. So now that we have our resin measured out here, we just have to mix it. This is the boring part. You want to give this a mix for 2 to 5 minutes. You want to make sure it's really nicely mixed up so that it is less likely to have cure issues, because uncured dice are not sellable dice, and it always sucks when you pull out a gorgeous, gorgeous set of dice and then you have to throw them away because they are not properly hardened. So, right now we're just going to give everything a good mix. Normally, if you don't have a pressure pot, you would want to be much more careful with this part so that you introduce as few air bubbles as possible into the resin. I use a pressure pot, so I am less concerned with bubbles, and I kind of just whip the resin, to be honest. I am not careful with this part of the process at all. I do take some steps to reduce air bubbles, especially with inclusions and things like that, but because I use a pressure pot to compress out all the air, I just kind of whip it until it's properly mixed. You can see that there are definitely bubbles popping up in this resin mixture, but I don't really care. We're going to get those out later, and so I would rather be a little more aggressive with the mixing just to make sure I don't have any pockets of unmixed resin that I've missed. This is the boring part. We're going to get to the fun part in just a moment. Since these are going to be mostly clear dye bases, we have a lot less steps. We didn't have any mold prep today, which is really nice. We'll have a little bit of mold prep for the florals, but if I'm doing something like galaxy dice or I'm doing brushed foil, that takes a lot more prep work before we even get to the resin, and we're not doing that today. So we're just mixing. I know these are some really great camera angles of my gloved hand. All right, so these are looking really good. As you can see, it is very frothy in there right now. And as we kind of work with this, those bubbles will rise to the surface and degas a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to separate this out into a couple of different cups. I'm going to move the single mold out of the way for now so that we have a little bit better sight line of what's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of this in one cup, and we're going to just set that to the side for now. This is going to be our cloud resin, but we don't need that right away. And I'm going to put some more in the other cup because I find it's a lot easier to pour out of the paper cups than it is to pour out of the bigger cups or the silicone measuring cups. It's just a lot easier to not do that. And then it's time for the sparkle, which is my favorite part. So first I always put a little bit of this Slice of the Moon silver mica in. It's just a really nice little sparkle. I've had this container since June of 2020 and I have used half of it. So a little bit of that really goes a long way in your dice, so you don't have to add a lot. And then we're also going to be putting some Chromatic Castle Life Essence, which is a gorgeous kind of color shift glitter that's got a little bit of like a blue to green. Put a little bit of that in there. And then we're also going to put a little bit of color spray, which is like a blue to purple almost. And this is what's going to give some really nice ethereal vibes. And then a smidge of amethyst, which is just like a white to purple. So a little bit of everything. I want those nice shimmery colors to kind of pop through in the clear resin, just to give it a little bit more depth and interest. And all I'm going to do right now is mix this all together. It doesn't look super exciting on camera because that color shift is super subtle and it's hard to see with all the bubbles in here, but it will look super pretty. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill my molds about halfway, somewhere between halfway and 2/3 of the way. I'm going to pour slightly high over the mold, and I want to try and get a nice thinner stream of resin that's going to help some of the bubbles escape as we are pouring. And the next step is the color, which is always fun. I love getting to that part. So we will be there in just a moment. So yeah, as you're hanging out, if you have questions or comments or thoughts or are curious about any part of this process, please feel free to let me know. One thing I love about the dice making community is how open it is to sharing techniques and sharing like how makers achieve certain effects. It's very much a collaborative community and I love being a part of that. So if you have questions, feel free to let me know. And if I have the knowledge, I will be happy to answer them. All right, so I'm gonna fill these singles molds, which you can't really see because I moved them out of the way. And again, we're just filling the molds about halfway right now, so that we have a base to do some fun ink work in the next part of this process. Okay, and then I'm just going to go ahead and start draining the rest of this resin into our cup. So these are going to be cloud dice, but they're going to be a purple tinted cloud dice. And there are some different ways that you could achieve that. You could tint the resin purple. That would give a really nice uniform color. You could put a smidge of ink in the cup as you're pouring, and don't mix it in. And as you poured, it would kind of spread through the resin in little ribbons. Today we're going to do kind of like a smoke effect. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to just put a little bit of resin here on my workspace. So I've got a little bit of resin right here, and I'm going to put a couple of drops of white ink. This is the Let's Resin alcohol ink. So we're going to put a couple of drops of white, if I can get this open. And then we're also going to put a drop of this purple Amethyst Ranger alcohol ink. Might need a smidge more white. We're going to be using this to create some smoke trails inside the dice. So I'm actually going to take a toothpick and kind of mix this together so that the purple and the white are kind of combined. And then now that I have some on my toothpick, I'm just going to stab it, not stab so that I'm poking holes into my mold, but I'm just going to put this purple ink into the molds to create some swirls. Oh, hey, thanks for the follow, friend. Welcome in. Happy to have you. We are making clouds today. Welcome, welcome. Once I get this mold finished with these ink swirls, I'll pick it up and show what that looks like. Yeah, the clouds are so fun. We're going to be making some sunset clouds and then some storm clouds before moving on to some florals if there's time. So we're having some fun today. We're doing a remake of a really popular design, and then a variant of that design, and then a new one. So I am just getting all of this ink onto my toothpick and then swirling it around that resin we already put in our molds here. And I put a little bit of resin down for the ink because I find it helps give the ink something to bind to so it doesn't soak into my toothpick. Hopefully you're having a good Saturday, friends. Alright, so now we can see that there are some nice purple kind of tendrils in the mold here. And they seem really thick right now, but those are going to expand when we put the actual clouds in. So I'm going to get a little more purple ink. I want to do a darker purple this time, so we're going to do less white. We're just going to do the same step for our second mold here. I also find using a little bit of resin and a little bit of white ink instead of just dropping the purple ink in helps keep the purple from burning, for lack of a better word. If you are not familiar with resin, purple inks are very notoriously obnoxious for turning brown and kind of burning out as the heat from the curing process heats up the dice in the resin. And then the purple inks turn kind of ugly, which is why I don't just drop straight purple ink into this particular design. Nobody wants brown clouds. That's not a happy vibe. I mean, I'm sure we can all imagine something that seems related to brown clouds. We don't want that. So that's why we add a little bit of purple, a little bit of white, and then the splash of resin here as well. I'm going to give myself a little more resin here. I've got my singles off to the side that we also need to do. So again, we got some purple. We'll put in a drop of white. We'll mix that up. And then we get to make our clouds, which is always fun, and it starts moving all this ink around and separating it so you don't just have these like chunky streaks of purple in your die, which like could be a look, it could be a vibe. It's not the vibe we're going for. So we are just making swirls. After I do this, I usually kind of stop and see if any of them could use a little more ink, are looking pretty empty. Some of these first ones I did, I think, could just be a little bit darker because there was a lot more white in those, and I'm worried that that purple is not going to show up. So we're just going to stick a little bit more in these first ones, just to make sure we don't lose the purple entirely. All right, these are looking really good. I always get excited with a design like this because it's one of those things that you truly will not know if it works until you pull them 12 to 16 hours later, which is both the fun part of dice making and the worst part of dice making. Sometimes you're just like super excited for something and then it just don't work, and that just is part of the process. All right, so I'm gonna now grab that second cup of resin we set to the side, and we're just gonna put some white alcohol ink into that. This cup does not have the sparkle and the shimmer in it because I don't want the clouds to be super sparkly. I want them to feel different from the rest of the dice. So we're gonna mix in some of this white alcohol ink. We have to be really careful because white alcohol ink is the heaviest, which is why white is used for Petri designs, because it's really heavy. So we don't want to put too much in, otherwise it will just all pull at the bottom. But we've got some nice white resin here. I know the colors today are super exciting to see on camera, but it's going to be good. So then I'm going to take a couple of pipettes and just kind of stab these in here to soak up some of that resin, because we want to try and create texture in our dice so that the clouds seem kind of nice and poofy, so they seem like they have some movement in them. It's going to be great. So you can kind of see the pipettes are pulling the resin up into the chamber, the pipette itself. I don't know the technical terms for these things, but we're pulling in the resin so that we can have a little bit more control of how we put the resin into our dice. So we have our nice little pipette here, and what I'm going to do is we'll start with this mold here. You're just going to kind of move the pipette up and down. Oh, sometimes you get an explosion of an air bubble, not ideal, but we can just shove that resin back in. This one's probably not going to look quite proper with that pop there. But basically you're just moving the pipette up and down around the mold as you're squeezing that white resin out. And that's going to be what creates some of that really nice texture. And then we're going to fill these with the rest of our clear resin at the end. So we don't want to fill the molds all the way to the top with the white. We're going to leave a little bit of space at the ends. I usually do, like, depending on the die, somewhere between like 3 and 5 up and downs per die. The bigger dice, like the D6, the D12, and the D20, I usually do 4 or 5, whereas like the D4, I'll maybe just do 3 because you don't want an incredible amount of white compared to the clear. And then we will be we'll be topping these off with the rest of our clear resin as well. And what this is going to do is that white ink is now going to blend with that purple ink streaks that we did. It's going to diffuse some of that purple, as well as kind of tinge some of the clouds purple, and it creates some really beautiful, beautiful effects of color, just like we're playing with the different amounts of color basically. And by going up and down into the mold, we're also creating some depth of where that white is, so that it's not all just at the top or the bottom of the dice. We want it to kind of move throughout, which it will sink because, like I said, that white ink is a lot heavier, so it will sink on its own. But giving it different places that it's starting to sink from just creates that movement and that depth in your dice. Might need to mix up a little more white in resin into our white mixture. Might not have gotten enough, but that's okay. That's what the extra resin is for. Got just a couple more dice here, and then we will be able to top these ones off and move into our storm clouds, which are going to be very similar in effect. I am going to tint that resin, so we're not going to be doing a clear base for that one. So it'll be slightly different. Slightly different aesthetic, but it's going to be the same concept, same effect. But we are going to start with like a nice steely blue sky. And instead of the purple tint, we're going to be doing like gray and black, which will be very cool. Hopefully. I've not made the storm cloud ones, so we're doing a little bit of experimentation today. Whenever I do these streams, I usually try and do like one design that I've poured in the past that people have been really excited about. And then I'll try and do like something new, like an experiment, so we can kind of talk through that process of like, how do you make a new design? So I try and kind of do a little bit of everything when doing a resin stream. All right, so our clouds are in. We're now just gonna top this off with the rest of our clear resin. I'm just gonna pour this directly into the mold. And when topping off your molds, you want a slight dome of resin on top, but you don't want like giant puddles of excess resin, because then you're more likely to get voids in your dice, which is no good. These are looking great, although the purple is a little more blue than it was last time, which is not quite the vibe, but you know, sometimes that is how it is. So now that this is mostly filled, I am going to grab a lighter. And we talked a little bit about bubbles earlier, so one of the things I don't mix carefully, but I do kind of quickly hit the tops of these just very quickly to get any of the bigger bubbles off the top of these dice, so that if we need to add a little more resin, I can tell now. You don't want to have the heat on your resin for too long, because then you could fuse the resin to your molds, which destroys your molds, and then you can't make dice with them. So you don't want to do that for too long. But you can do a little. So then you just kind of want to gently pat your molds. You don't want to squeeze down too hard, but you do want to kind of make sure it's got a good seal on there, that the lid has settled in, so that you aren't going to get like raised faces on your dice. We're just going to kind of pat these down, and I'm going to set these off to the side so that I can put them in the pressure pot at the end. Okay. With the single molds, they are a little bit more finicky to make sure you've got those lids set properly on them, but it's the same concept. All right, so we're going to set all of these off to the side. And then get our next set of molds out. So I currently have 3 sets of molds, I guess 6 molds for dice sets that are for resin currently. So these are like my slightly older ones. I usually do the more experimental sets in the slightly older molds, just because I'd rather have the ones that I know are going to turn out well in the newer ones. And then this is a jewelry mold. So it's got a D6, D4 pair, or D6, D20 pair, not a D4, and then a D10 pair and a D4 pair. And I use these for jewelry. So for this one, we're going to have like jewelry, or I could do like health potion duos. I have some options there for those molds. And then we're going to basically start the process over. So this one, we are going to start by mixing resin. We are going to color this resin instead of leaving it clear, just for a little bit of color variety. I think that'll be really nice. I didn't grab that color out because that would have been smart. Let me find that really quickly. We are going to be tinting it with this monsoon color, so we're not going to put a ton of color in because I do want them to be really nice and transparent. We are going to put a little bit of color in though. So just like last time, we're going to start off with about 40 milliliters of the hardener, part B, and then 40 milliliters of the actual epoxy. Again, this is the Chromatic Castle's Chromatic Cast. It is a newer resin that just came out recently, so I got a bottle to test it, and I've been really happy with it so far. I haven't had any curing issues so far. It's a thicker resin, so I do have to be a little bit more careful with the florals, which we'll get to when I pour those. You do have to be a little bit more careful with your florals, just because this is thicker than the resin that I was using before. But so far, I've been really happy with the cure time, with the hardness of the cure, and with colors. So really been impressed with this one so far. I haven't finished the bottle yet, so I have this, and then I got Pro Marine resin recently, so we're going to be testing that out next, just to see what I like best. And then we're going to mix this for 2 minutes, just like we did last time. Because I am doing another set of white clouds, I'm going to reuse the white cup and those white pipettes, just again to reduce the waste that is created when pouring these. Yeah, so we are mixing our resin. We want to mix this for 2 minutes, making sure you're scraping the sides, making sure you're scraping the bottom. Definitely want to get all of that resin properly mixed. Sometimes you can have like pockets of unmixed resin and those dice won't cure. That happens a lot, I found, when I'm like scraping the cup to try and fill like one last die. I often have cure issues with that die because sometimes what's on the walls doesn't get mixed all the way. Which is why I don't ever pour directly from the mixing cup into the molds, because you're more likely to get uncured little mist pockets that way. While we're hanging out, I am getting ready for a shop update tomorrow, so if you are interested in resin dice that have been handmade with lots of love, either before or after watching this stream, you want to get some of your own, I do have a fully stocked Etsy right now, which is etsy.com/shop/sunflowerdice. I am also moving to my own website, so I'm moving to sunflowerdice.com. So all new items are going to be added there. And my first shop update on the new website is tomorrow morning. I've got previews uploaded right now, and I'm going to be finishing the previews this afternoon once the light is really good, so I can get some nice photos of all the new dice. We've got lots of floral dice for this update, and then some returning dice, some galaxy dice, and then the premiere of the stone dice are also happening tomorrow, which is really exciting. Depending on how long these 3 sets take, I might do a stone dice pour. I haven't quite decided yet if I want to mess with that today. So we might do some Jesmonite dice. Well, they're not Jesmonite. It's Terraform, which is another Chromatic Castle product that is similar to Jesmonite. We're still working the kinks out with that, but it's been fun to kind of experiment with a new medium. All right, so I am going to pour out some of this resin into our cloud cup, and we're going to come back to that. And then the rest of that we're going to start putting into here. I don't think it's all going to fit, which is fine. Okay. So, just like our last setup, we're going to start with some shimmer. Again, for teammates that are just joining in, I'm using the Slice of the Moon. That doesn't want to focus. Hello? It's Slice of the Moon mica powder. A little bit of that stuff goes so far. It is very, very pigmented. I mean, it's not pigment. It's not coloring the resin. It's very sparkly, though. You're definitely going to notice it is in your dice. I am also putting some color shift from Chromatic Castle in. I like to combine the Life Essence, the color spray, to get just like a really fun combination of color shift. So it's not just like one. This is not as strong as it would be if you put it on a dark colored resin, because there's not as much for it to kind of stand out against. But I think it does add a nice layer of depth to the dice. So we're going to give this a good mix, just to get all that color, sparkle, blended in. But then for this, since I want it to be kind of like a storm cloud, we're going to start with, wow, focus. Hello? One of these days this camera will focus. This is the Ranger alcohol ink in the shade Monsoon. And I'm going to start with just a single drop of this, because I still, well, that dripped. Oh dear, we're making a mess. That's what paper towels are for. Okay, I'm gonna wipe this off because it just kind of dribbled down the side. We'll put a single drop in the actual resin. Yeah, that exploded a little bit there. Whoops. We're gonna just stir this in. I want to get a nice base color, but I don't want it to be too dark. Because if you put too much alcohol ink in, it stops being translucent. We don't want to lose the translucency. So I might just put one more drop in just to darken it up a smidge. And then as this cures, it also will become darker. So we have a really nice kind of steely bluish color resin. And just like last time, I'm going to start by filling my molds up between halfway and 2/3. Because we want some nice storm clouds, so we want room for those clouds to go in. This might be a little more green than I was hoping for, but I think it'll be okay. It's hard to tell sometimes, you know. but I think it'll be okay. Gonna fill all of our molds partway up. Might have mixed just enough color there to get all of our molds partway filled. Nice. Okay. So we have that. Next, just like we did with our previous dice, we are going to get a little bit of a workspace set up. I want to do this outside of the range of that purple puddle, so I'm just going to put a little bit of resin kind of up here. And then we're going to put some black ink into that resin puddle, because I want the storm clouds to take on like some shades of gray. So just like we did last time, we're going to take some of our ink, we're going to swirl it around. I'm going to be a little bit more light-handed with this because black ink is really overpowering. So I'd rather start with less and then go in and add some more once I put the clouds in if I feel like it needs it. Now we're just creating some nice swirls of this black ink so that the clouds have something to mix and interact with. And when you're doing this with this toothpick, you want to be really careful that you're not sticking it so far in that you're scraping the bottom of your mold. Because once that mold is damaged, like that's not going to go away. That will show up in every single die that you pour from here on out. So you want to make sure you're being super careful with your toothpick. You don't want to like stab it down so hard that you're gouging your molds. I usually just try and stick it just underneath the surface of that resin we've poured, and then kind of swirl it around a little bit. Because prolonging the life of your mold is probably the single most important thing you can do as a dice maker. Alright, so we have some straight black in. Now I want to take a drop of the white and make a more gray, and I'm going to do one more round with the grayer color. Just to get some color variance in there. I don't know if this will really come through once that white's in, but it's worth trying. Another thing is I am choosing to make multiple dice at a time of this design, even though I've never made it before. Mostly because I like the cloud effect regardless. I am a little concerned that the blue turned a little more green than I was hoping. So if you are newer to dice making, or you are more concerned about how things are going to turn out, I recommend only making one of a design at a time until you know that you like it. I'm not doing that. We're a risk taker today, and sometimes those risks pay off and sometimes they don't. I like to make more than one at a time. That way if a die does fail, I have like backup dice that I can replace it with and hopefully have at least one fully functional set. So that's just kind of a choice that I've made as a dice maker, but it is not always a popular or beneficial one. So something to consider if you are interested in making dice is to test your designs out before you make more of them. Alright, so I am going to empty out these pipettes. I just put some white ink in with this new batch of clear resin. I might need a third hand for this because this cup doesn't want to stay in one spot. But we're going to repeat our cloud process again with this new batch of dice. So while those pipettes are loading up, I am just going to dump the rest of this clear resin into our colored resin, just so I can get this larger plastic cup out of the way. And we'll use this to top off anything if we need to, although my plan for this is to try and fill the molds the rest of the way with the clouds instead of the clear on top. We'll see if I have enough white. So our pipettes are filling. We're just going to go in like we did last time, moving the pipette around. We can give it some swirls just to create some interesting texture and movement within each of the die. Normally you could also do this with syringes, which is a lot nicer because you are less likely to get those explodey little bits of trapped air exiting the pipette. I'm out of syringes, which is why I am not doing that. But if you have those, this is a good technique to do that with because you are less likely to get those explosions of resin from introducing air into your mold. Air is not the friend of the dice maker, but we're out of supplies, so we're using what we have. So we are filling the pipette, and then you could also do this with just one syringe or pipette, but I like to have one filling while I am using the other one. It just makes the process go a little bit faster. Trying to get as much of this white resin in here as possible. And then after I do the 2 to 3 stabby swirls within the resin, I'm just kind of doing some swirling movement on top just to get a really nice solid base on the top of the die. This gray kind of collection of shades here of the black and grays with the white is looking really great, which is what I was going for. So hopefully that blue that we used as a base darkens up a little bit more and is more blue than green. I might be able to impact that with an ink color too. So all is not lost. Dice making, there are many steps and many ways to get the looks and the results that you are wanting, so all is not lost yet. With a design like this is always the really tedious part because filling up the pipettes can just slow things down. But I'm definitely trying to kind of insert the white through where we put those black streaks into our resin so that the resin will move those streaks around so that they're less distinct and thick and they're more kind of subtle wispies. And we'll hopefully get some really nice textures. The nice thing about this chromatic cast resin is this is a thicker resin. This would not work as well with a thin resin unless you let it sit for a while. Like if you want that nice texture, you definitely need to be using a thicker resin, or you need to let your resin get closer to the end of its pot life. I don't like letting resin sit and thicken because I'm impatient, so using a thicker resin at the start is my choice of way to do that. And then we are starting to run out of the white, and I did put the clear in with the blues, so we might have to get creative with our jewelry mold, I think it'll be okay. Sometimes you just don't divvy your resin up appropriately and you run out of the color you need. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by doing the D4s. We'll do the D4s to match what we just did. And then I guess we'll just pour all of this into here. It's not very blue because we used most of the blue. So I'm hoping if I just put a nice little bit of white ink in there, that it'll be okay. Hopefully. We'll see. So we're just going to drop some more of this white ink in there. We're going to make some more cloud resin. These are going to be slightly bluish clouds, but that could be like an interesting effect. I'm not upset about it. Do our D6 next. Get this cup out of the way. It's always nice to kind of clean up the space as you go, so you just have more workspace. And we are just gonna fill up the rest of these molds. And then we'll kind of transition a little bit and we'll do some flower work. I'll kind of swap out the workspace because it's a little sticky. A lot of people use a silicone workspace. That's definitely a recommendation. I just haven't found one that fits my desk that's not too small or too big, and I could cut it, but we get HelloFresh and these recipe cards are like coated in something that the resin like won't soak in through. So I just kind of recycle those as a way to protect my desk while I'm working with resin. We are definitely almost out of resin. This last little bit, it's gonna be fine. We have enough to finish this, so that's nice. It's always like really annoying when you don't have enough resin to do like one last dye, because mixing up that small of an amount of resin is really hard. So I'm just going to kind of go through and add a little bit to top off a couple of these. Then we're going to take the lighter like we did last time and just very briefly hit the tops of these molds. Again, you don't want to do this for too long because if your resin overheats, it can fuse to your silicone and then you have damaged your mold. And damaged molds make more work. We don't want that. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and put the lids on these beautiful, beautiful dice. You say nice things about them as you put the lids on so that they come out better. We're going to pat these on gently, but we don't want to press down too hard. And then, again, I'm just setting these off to the side. I have a caddy that goes into my pressure pot. So I just set these off to the side on that while we're working on the other dice. So again, we're pressing these down a little bit because we want to get the lid as flat onto the mold as possible, so that you have less chance of voids, you have less chance of lifted faces. It just makes less work for you when it comes time to clean up those dice. All right. I am going to change my gloves, and I'm also going to grab just one more of these to kind of cover up the giant puddles of sticky spots we made. And I'm changing my gloves because with the flowers, I'm going to need to use tweezers to place the flowers into the mold, and I just don't want to get resin all over the handles of my tweezers. Sometimes it's not avoidable, but in this situation it is, so we are going to avoid it. So for this one as well, I am going to do a jewelry mold because I have it. And florals are always really popular, so it's always nice to have extras when working with floral dice because people tend to like them. So I'm just going to move some stuff around. I'm going to let my hands air out a little bit. So the vision for these dice are kind of a like witchy version of the Titania dice that I recently posted to Instagram and Twitter. Those dice were very ethereal, lots of purples. It had these beautiful color shift clouds, similar to the clouds we just made, but like color shift instead of white. They were absolutely lovely, so beautiful. And I want to make a darker version of those, which is what we are going to do today, if I could get gloves on. It's always hard putting a second pair of gloves on when you've just taken a pair off because your hands are all sweaty. It's no good. It's no good, but that's okay. We're here. It's going to be great. All right. Almost. All right, we've got some gloves. So I'm going to start by putting in these black flower pieces. We're going to start with the black base because these are the biggest flowers that I'm putting in, and I like to go with the biggest ones first. So I'm just pulling some of the florals off of the stem and then gently placing them into the dice molds. Oh dear. Okay, no, don't fall. Don't fall. We're also making a mess. Dice making is a messy business. If you are not someone that likes mess or sticky things, probably not a hobby for you, because everything is messy and sticky. Alright, so I'm just kind of making sure to place bigger flowers into bigger mold spaces, and then smaller stems go in smaller mold spaces. Sometimes if there just isn't a smaller flower, I'll just pull a couple petals off. So like the D4s are really, like these skinny ones are kind of hard. So I usually just pull a petal or two off. And then I'm just throwing the stems away because I don't want them in this particular design. Like this flower is massive. I could put it in a D4, but that's going to fill up pretty much the whole mold, so I'm probably going to break off a couple of the petals and put them in some smaller die. Put that one in that D4. It's always nice to put a really nice full one in the D20 just because I think it looks pretty nice. And we're going to be adding some smaller florals on top of this, so I'm not too worried right now if the die look empty, because that's what the smaller florals are for more filler, to kind of round things out. And for this particular design, I'm also not too worried about the flowers like breaking or crumbling, so if they break a little bit as I'm putting them into the mold, that's fine. I'm not that worried about it. For other designs, I would definitely want to keep the flowers intact, so I would be a little more gentle, but for this one, I don't really care. So to accent this one, we're gonna go with some purple flowers. I have no idea what these are called. I had them in a bouquet recently and dried them. They are kind of stabby, and they fall apart in these kind of big bunches. So I am basically just going to take a couple of them at a time and put them in, and I'm not too worried about like putting them in different directions. I'm just kind of spreading them around inside of the molds. Like I don't want them to be all clumped up in the same spot, is more what I'm worried about. So we're just gonna go through and pull a couple of these off for each one. I try and put some of the bigger ones into the bigger die molds. I usually put a couple extra ones in like the D20 and the D12 just because they have a lot more surface area. And I'm not being too picky about the placement of these because once I pour the resin in, they are going to move. That's just the nature of florals. They're really light, so they tend to float a little bit. They're going to move around. So I'm not being overly careful about where I put these in the mold. I'm just making sure that the mold has them. And then we're just going to do that for every single mold here. These flowers also tend to get a little flaky, so if some of the like greenery kind of falls into a mold as I'm working, I'm not too worried about it. I think that kind of adds to the depth and dimension of these a little bit. So for this purpose, that kind of works. But something to be careful of if you're working with dried florals is they tend to make a little bit of a mess. If you don't want that mess inside your dice, you just have to be careful about where you're holding the flowers as you're pulling them apart. Okay, every flower or every mold there has at least one of these. And then I was gonna put some of these like pink in, but I also have some red moss, and I'm wondering if the red moss might look cooler. If you're hanging out in chat, let me know. Should I put pink in with this purple and black for some like witchy vibes, or should I put some red moss in? What are your thoughts? I have so many of these little purple flowers. I've been using them a lot because I dried a lot of them recently. And they're just like a really nice filler flower shape, and they keep their color really well in resin. Sometimes when you put florals into resin, they like bleach almost, like they just lose a lot of their color. And these ones don't do that, which is really nice. Yeah, I almost feel like the pink might be too jarring in this dice design. Like everything else is very dark. I wonder if the red would look better. Let me see. I'm pretty sure I still have some. Yeah, I've got this red moss. I think we're gonna go with that. I think that'll just look a little more cohesive with this dice design, so I think we're gonna go with this. So this moss, it is just dried moss. I usually just use the tweezers to pull a little bit out. We have a fire truck driving by. Apologies if you can hear that. I live right next to a fire station. Gotta love that. That's a pretty common occurrence here because the fire station is just around the corner. So it often has to drive by. So yeah, I'm just gonna pull off little bits of this moss and kind of add it in. I'm trying to do, you know, a variation of sizes, of shapes of the moss. If I get like these longer, skinnier pieces, I try and put those in like the skinnier dice, just because I think it tends to look nice when the shape of the inclusions almost mimics the shape of the dice. If I tear off a bigger chunk, I'm going to put that in a bigger die, obviously. But again, I'm not being like super careful or meticulous about like every die must get exactly the same amount of moss. Like, that's not really the point. I want things to look like, I kind of want this to look like a very organic kind of set. I want it to look very ethereal, kind of magical, and we're going to achieve that with some of the effects that we're going to be using. The moss is very flaky, it's going to fall apart and kind of get everywhere. And then the last thing I'm going to be putting in are some of these like brown little floral bits, just to have another like shape and color floating around in the dice here. And again, I want to put like bigger pieces in bigger molds, smaller pieces in smaller molds. This D4 is kind of full, so, or D4, this is a D6, so I'm kind of putting a smaller one in there. And I'm just kind of using this last inclusion to kind of round out any molds that feel a little empty. That's a hair, we don't want that in the die. So I find just having like a variety of textures and colors goes a really long way into making these look better. So I like to play with like the colors. I wanted to go with a very like moody neutral palette for this. And I think these brown flowers are gonna look really nice in there as like, not a contrast, but like a little bit of a contrast to the black that we have as well. And this prep right here is why floral dice are often, at least in my shop, the floral dice are always going to be more expensive, just because they take a lot of time to prepare. They take more inclusions, like a lot more is going into this die than just a little bit of alcohol ink. And I've spent, you know, 15-20 minutes just prepping these molds. So this is why more complicated dice and dice that have more inclusions in them are often going to cost you more money. It's mostly just a time thing. Also, you know, inclusions are not free, and so if I'm including 4 different kinds of flowers in a die, then that's, you know, 4 different materials that had to be purchased. So we have our molds prepped now. They are looking very muted in color palette, which is exactly what I was going for. I'm very excited for these. And then we've got to get our resin. Just gonna get this white cloud resin out of the way. I'm gonna pour some of that into my dump mold. I am currently making tic-tac-toe boards out of leftover resin. They're super colorful, they're kind of silly, but they're a lot of fun to have at like conventions and stuff as just an extra thing to have at the table. Like, you might not be interested in dice, but maybe you've got a little one that you like playing tic-tac-toe with. It's also just a good way to use all of the resin that you're using, because otherwise it just feels very wasteful. And I like to try and minimize that waste as much as possible when working with resin. All right, we are going to mix up our last bit of resin for the day. Again, going with that 1-to-1 ratio, so however many milliliters of the resin we're going to put in, we need to put the same amount of hardener in. And this one is by volume and not by weight. Some resins are, you need to measure by volume. I try not to get those ones because I don't have a craft scale handy, so I try and just get the 1-to-1 by volume, not by weight. I think I said that wrong, but hopefully the point comes across anyway. All right, we have our last batch of resin for the day. We've got to mix it just like we do. So this is, it's pretty clear when I pour it. It will become a little more cloudy because I'm not being careful about bubbles as I mix. And you're going to mix this for 2 to 3 minutes. It's the most exciting part of dice making. It's also one of the most tedious parts, but you have to do it properly or your dice are never going to cure because you're not mixing everything the right way. And then all the chemical reactions get messed up and all of that stuff. So we don't want to do that. Do I want foil in these? Oh, that's a consideration. I think I do. We're gonna mix this first and then I might add a little bit of foil to it just to get a little bit of extra something something. Yeah. We're mixing. We are mixing. And as you can see, this is a lot less clear just because I have introduced many bubbles into this resin as I've mixed it. But I'm trying to make sure I'm really scraping all of the sides. Yeah, these are just a little bit too tall to easily mix with a popsicle stick. So these aren't my favorite cups, but it's what I had at hand. So we're going to use it. Normally I use 120 milliliter silicone mixing cups, but those, I can't read the numbers anymore, so I need to replace those, and they just haven't arrived yet. Alright, so just like with our other ones, I am going to set aside a good chunk of this for a kind of a cloud mixture. We're going to be doing something very similar to what we did with the clouds. I'm going to get all of this resin out. I'm going to just kind of leave this propped up here for a second. I'm going to put some silver mica in both cups. And then I wanted to get some foil. So I think I'm going to use some of this. It's called Rainbow Flake. I got this at Michael's. It's like a kind of an oil slick foil. I think that'll look really cool with this design, with like the color palette that we have here. So I think I'm going to use some of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of this into our resin. And then when we mix it, it's going to break the bigger chunks down into some smaller chunks. Because we don't want like giant chunks of foil in these days. gonna give this a good stir, and as you can see, like the foil is starting to break down into smaller pieces, which is exactly what we want. And since this is a floral design, I'm gonna need to pour a lot slower and in a lot thinner of a pour stream to make sure that the resin gets into all the nooks and crannies. So I'm pouring from very high, I'm pouring in a very thin stream of resin. And the reason for this is because I want to make sure that the resin is able to really soak down through all of the inclusions that we have so that we don't end up with any voids on the top faces of our dice. Florals really, oh, that came out way too fast. Florals really trap air, and so we want to give this plenty of time to degas or to let the bubbles kind of work its way to the surface so that we don't have any trapped air pockets in our dice. Some of these are going to look like they're really full of resin to start, and as time goes on, that resin is going to start kind of bubbling and popping and sinking down deeper. Especially the moss that I put in here, that's really prone to trapping air bubbles. Which is another reason that floral dice cost so much more money. They take more time and they are more likely to fail. And it also just has a lot more materials to factor in. Okay, so we're gonna start with this. I'm just kind of going in. Any of them that are like really empty, I am gonna put a little bit more into to start. And then I'm gonna start our ethereal cloud mixture. That's going to go into the middle of these dice before we top them off. Yes. Okay. So this mixture right here, I am going to put about 6 to 8 different kinds of color shift. I'm going to start with the 3 that I've already used. These again are all from Chromatic Castle. They make amazing color shift products. So if you're looking for some great color shifts, I definitely recommend checking them out. I am obsessed with all of them. So we're using Life Essence, Color Spray, and Amethyst. And I am putting more in here than I would in my like translucent dice, just to name that as well. Then I'm going to take this Rosy Dawn, which is a really pretty pink color shift. It's got a pink base to it. That's going to help this cloud be a little more opaque. Then we have Charm, which is another like pinky blue color shift. And then last, because I want to darken this up just a little bit, I'm also going to put a little bit of this one that's called Curse in as well, just to try and darken this up a tiny bit. I'm going to give this a good mix just to see where we're at with color. And this is looking great. We have this gorgeous, very dimensional, kind of pinky hued color shift pigment mixture that we're going to be using to insert into our flower dice as kind of a cloudy haze in the middle before we top it off with more clear. This is looking absolutely beautiful. It's definitely pink. It's got a tinge of green that's a little bit hard to pick up on camera. But the important thing is that it is semi-opaque, meaning it's not going to completely block out our florals. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put like the tiniest like half drop of white. I'm not even squeezing the bottle all the way, just to give that color shift a little bit of something to stand out against. And then we're going to get our pipettes and start sucking that mixture up. While that's happening, I'm just gonna put some of our materials away to clear out our space a little bit while our pipettes are getting filled. I like to kind of put things away as I go, so I've got paper towels handy and I just kind of tuck things back into their drawers. Any of the drawers that I had open to take out materials, I leave open until I put them away so I don't have to touch the drawers with the resin sticky hands. And then I am noticing just a couple of these dice have a ton of bubbles that don't seem to be popping very well, so I'm just going to kind of be very careful as I get ready to fill these with our cloud mixture. So you can see it is semi-translucent. You can see through it a little bit, but it's got a ton of color shift in. And I want to just insert this into the middle of our dice so that the florals kind of look like they're being intermingled with this really magical something. Magical effect, maybe? This looked absolutely beautiful with the Titania dice that I did this for originally. So I'm hoping that with this like darker version that it will turn out equally as cool. And then I'm not worried about filling the dice all the way with this cloud mixture. I'm going to leave a little bit of room to top it off with the clear. I am making sure to stick the pipette down in multiple spaces so that we really get in between those floral bits. When I get in the flowers more than just behind the flowers. So this one is basically done, so I'm going to take a little bit of our clear and then just top off some of the dice so that this mold has time to fully degas before we start putting lids on. I want any large air bubbles to have time to come to the surface so that I can pop them before I put the lids on. We're just going to continue to repeat this process with our other dice. As I'm doing this, I'm also trying to kind of move the flowers around a little bit so they're not just in a big clump in the middle of the die mold. I want to kind of spread them out a little bit. D20 always takes so much resin. And as you can see here, there are a lot of surface bubbles kind of coming to the top of this mold, so we're going to want to make sure we pop those and top off as needed so that we are as unlikely as possible to have like giant voids in our dice when we take them out. Alright, this mold is ready to be topped off. So again, we're pouring really high, really thin stream. We want like a little bit of a concave, a dome. We want a little bit of a dome on the top of each die mold. Kind of like when you're trying to fill drops of water onto a penny. You want a little bit of that doming effect on your dice, but you don't want like giant pools. I am knocking things over. Because if you have too much resin, then your lids don't seat properly, and then you're going to get a bunch of raised faces, which we don't want. Gotta kind of hold this cup in place while the pipettes are in there because there's not a lot of resin left, which is why the cup keeps falling over. we are getting close to the end of the stream, so if there are any like questions that are coming up for anyone, feel free to drop them in the chat. I would love to answer any questions that anyone has about this process, whether it's this design specifically or just resin work in general. I would love to chat, so if you have any questions, please let me know. As we are getting near the end of the stream. I was thinking about doing a faux stone set, but I don't know that I really want to today. This took a good amount of time, and I have a lot of listing photos to do today still, so I think we're going to stop after this set. We are going to go through and just quickly hit the top of these to get any of the larger bubbles off of the surface. Again, being careful that we're not holding the lighter in any one place for too long so that we're not fusing our resin to our mold. And then I'm just kind of looking and seeing like this D6, a lot of the stuff is floated to the top, so I'm just kind of going through and pushing everything back down a little bit so that it's back inside the mold when I put the lid on it. Obviously stuff is going to float and move around, and that's fine, but I want to make sure I'm not catching anything with the lid of the mold, because that's just going to create bubbles. All right, and with that, we are going to put the lids on our last set of dice for the day. Again, you want to kind of roll the lid on, make sure your notches are aligned properly, and kind of tap it into place. You don't want to squeeze too hard, because then you create kind of a vacuum seal that can create voids when you put that in your pressure pot. This one goes here. Again, just tapping it down. These molds are a little yellow stained from a dirty pour I did with a lot of yellow. So the stain is there, but it does not transfer onto the dice because it's an older stain. And with that, we have poured 3 different dice designs today. If you are interested in seeing how these designs turned out, you can give me a follow over on Instagram.com/sunflower.dice. And I will be, I always do sneaks when I demold things. I post demolding reels, videos, and all sorts of things. So you can see the dice that get poured live on stream. You can see what they look like fresh out of the mold, as well as after they are polished and inked. So I'd love to see you over there for the results of today's pours. Right now I'm just taking all of this like really pretty shimmery resin. I'm putting it in a meeple mold that I have. I've started putting these in orders as freebies. They're really fun. Just like, you know, a little something extra. And we are getting ready to wrap up. So the last step of this process that doesn't happen on stream is I do put these in a pressure pot for the full duration of the cure. This resin cures in about 12 hours, so usually a little bit sooner, sometimes not. So I usually check on my dump mold to see, is the resin seeming pretty set, or is it still a little soft? Things like weather can really influence whether or not resin sets in the estimated time given or not. And we're like right on the edge today, so it might not be able to get poured or pulled until tomorrow morning. And that's just part of the course of working with resin. It is super finicky, and even though I've been doing it for almost 2 years now, I still get dice fails very regularly. Because sometimes things just don't work out, or you get bubbles, or it doesn't cure all the way. You put too much alcohol ink in your resin. There's a variety of reasons that your dice don't turn out. And that's okay. It's part of the fun and frustration of this hobby. So for those of you that have been hanging out, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this stream, I do resin pouring streams about once a month. The best way to find out when I'm doing that is to either give me a follow here so you can get that notification, or follow me over on Twitter. Also at Shadowed Lady Sif, the link's down in the chat. When I'm not doing these dice pouring streams, I do a couple of other variety streams. I am currently doing a Sims 4 Legacy Challenge, which will be happening tomorrow on Sims Sunday, and would love to have you back for that. And if you're really into D&D actual plays, you can come hang out next Thursday over on my friend Marco's channel. We are doing a Strixhaven actual play called Curriculum of Wonders, which has been so much fun. I am playing a lovely character named Helianthus, who is very optimistic and outgoing and dedicated to school and her friends, and the cast is really great. And my friend Marco is just a really great DM, so he is doing a really great job turning this campaign book into a really interesting homebrew campaign. And then last, if you are interested in seeing more of my dice work, or purchasing some dice for your own, you can check it out over on Instagram or Etsy. I need to update this because I also do have my own standalone shop, which is sunflowerdice.com, which is where all of the new dice are going to be posted. I will not be adding anything new to Etsy. Not going to get into the politics of that. Basically, Etsy just has a bunch of fees and is nickel and diming makers more than ever, despite record-breaking profits over the last 2 years. So I have made the decision to move off of Etsy once everything expires, because I've already paid for those listings, so I'm just going to leave those up. But everything new will be posted to my new standalone shop. All of my links and stuff are in the link tree on my Instagram page, so you can find it all that way. Thank you all so much for hanging out today. I hope you had a good time. If you ever have any questions about dice making, feel free to reach out. I love chatting about it. This community is amazing and is so willing to share information with each other, which is one of the things that I really love about it. And I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.